So, Nancy, this is the last opportunity we're going to get to have you on Let's Talk. And it seems appropriate because Children's Services is going through a massive amount of change, has been for a couple of years now, but we know that there's a lot coming. And I thought it would be a really good opportunity for you to talk a little bit about where have we come from, what kinds of things have we seen in the Children's Services world, a little bit about how we're engaging with the community in general and how we're bringing the community into the work that we do so that we're much more engaged and focused on the whole region. And then maybe you could finish out by talking a little bit about what are we facing, what's coming at us from the ministry as you leave us, and perhaps finally some words of wisdom if you have any to impart to the staff, to the region, and particularly to your successor. So let's start off with the legislation and the background of what we've been doing over the last few years.
Sure. Children's Services has been in a period of significant change over the last 5 years, actually. And we've had to find very different ways of working with the community in a much more integrated fashion. So we've been working with partners that we hadn't engaged with before. So education, post-secondary education, the ministry, to look at how are we better planning around the services that we deliver across the licensed early learning and childcare sector. One of the other big shifts that's happened in the whole modernization strategy has really been about how do we improve services for families and children, and how do we look at it as a broader system, so we don't just view it as one service system separately. We're looking at it as a much broader system that looks at children from birth through to when they exit school, and how do we make that transition much smoother for them.
So less of a focus on just the early learning and the childcare piece, and more a focus on the trajectory of children right through to the end of adolescence.
Yes, for sure.
Okay.
And though there has been a lot with regards to legislative changes, which is really focused on our oversight on licensed childcare to make sure that our practices are keeping pace with what evidence and research is telling us is really important around brain development for children and supporting that. So we're also in huge transformational change in addition to having to learn new ways of working together in the community.
So when you're talking about the community, Children's Services has always had a responsibility for planning broadly, but my recollection is that we focused largely on childcare and the needs of that particular system in our planning. What are we doing now that is different? And more particularly, can you talk a little bit about the Children's Planning Table?
Sure. So there's two pieces that we're doing. One is much broader consultation with our licensed early learning and childcare community around new initiatives, how they'll roll out and how we can work together to implement them. The second piece is we broadened and opened what we're calling the Children's Planning Table, which has a focus on children from pre-birth to school exit now. And that involves about 20 sectors. So we have stopped thinking about things, in fact, as sectors or service sectors, and started to think about, no, we all work together, a child is a child is a child. So we work together across all the service providers. So we have about 60 organizations represented at the Children's Planning Table with about 400 members. So we have 4 to 5 meetings a year, which involve roughly about 100 to 120 people attending the meetings. And we come together to do joint service planning. So we are very much still in the early stages around integrated service planning. It takes time, as you can imagine, with a group that's that large. And a big piece of that is building trust and understanding, common language, so that when we're saying things, we're understanding the same thing.
So when you're talking about 400 people and 60 agencies, are we talking about, you say you're trying to get rid of the word or use less the word sector. So are we talking about the folks at that table being from, say, child protection and children's mental health and all of the what we would have called different sectors coming together with a singular focus of children as a holistic being?
Yes, it's primarily that kind of a focus,
Okay.
and it involves anyone who provides any level of service to children. So we also have, aside from child protection, we have libraries involved. We have Ontario Early Years Centres involved. So it's a really broad group. Education is at the table, post-secondary. We actually have a lot of post-secondary students who are now coming to attend the meetings because they're finding it as a really neat experience to observe what's happening in terms of joint initiatives. We've had about 20 new initiatives come forward to the Children's Planning Table for input over the last year.
Mm-hmm.
So they may not be things that Children's Services is directly involved in terms of planning, but other organizations may be involved in, and they bring those to the Children's Planning Table for input.
That's amazing. That's not the usual suspects at that table. That's well beyond who usually would have come together to plan. So, moving forward, what are we facing in the future? What's coming at us from the ministry, and what are your parting words of wisdom for us?
So I think the big thing that's coming forward now, which will probably roll out over the next 3 years, is the fourth phase of the Ontario Provincial Framework, which is Ontario Early Years Child and Family Centres. So it is compiling or combining all ministry-funded child and family support programs into one funding envelope, which will be under us as the Consolidated Municipal Service Manager. So we'll have responsibility for community-based planning around all early year services, so that it encompasses all services for children under the age of 6.
That's quite an addition to what we're already doing. Are we ready for it?
I think we are ready for it. What's really interesting about this initiative is that it's going to allow us to look at things from a neighborhood base, so that we can start to look at neighborhoods and say what services are there, what services need to come in, and how do we do that in an integrated fashion. So it involves all of our service providers in this community. So it's a really exciting initiative.
And our decision to look at neighborhoods is based on research we have that tells us that those neighborhoods either need more or less service?
Right. So it's really looking at neighborhoods from an asset base as well, saying, what kinds of things are available in the neighborhood, what's the composition of who lives in that neighborhood, and what might be a needed service to help support children.
Great. We enjoy a reputation as being a community where our focus on children has been very clear. It's been innovative, it's been very much modern, it's been on the cutting edge. Even the ministries have looked at us as an example for other municipalities. You've been one of a couple of directors who have led that. You've demonstrated incredible leadership in getting us to this point. What would you suggest we need to focus on in order to keep Waterloo Region where we are now and continuing to lead the movement in focusing on children?
I think for me the biggest piece that I would share in terms of advice is, and I actually just watched a video the other day on this, is talking about we can't continue with the status quo.
Right.
It hasn't been successful in all entirety, so we need to think about new ways of doing things.
Yeah.
And we can't continue to apply things in the same way. I think my one piece of advice would be that service system integration is really hard work. It requires a lot of collaboration. It requires a lot of partnership, but it's well worth the effort in the end. And you have to, as you said, you have to keep in mind what's this for, and it's for children.
Right. And watching you do it, it also requires a great deal of patience. But you're right, it's all about the kids. So thanks very much for doing this. I know it's one of the last things you're doing as you leave us. I wish you really well in your retirement, and thanks for all the contributions you've made, not only to the corporation, but to the region and to children and families' lives here. Thanks very much.